Hi, it's my pleasure to talk about summer reading and summer reading choices. Summer is my time to get in all the reading that I don't get to do during the year. So I read voraciously over the summer, and I've chosen 4 books to talk to you about today. The first one is called The 4 Agreements. It's by Don Miguel Ruiz. He's a Mexican shaman, but used to be a surgeon. And he comes from a long line of shamans, and he has 4 agreements that he says to live by them is to live like a joyous life. And I'm just going to tell you what the 4 agreements are, and if you're interested, pick up the book and read it. So the 4 agreements are: be impeccable with your word, don't take anything personally, don't make assumptions, and the last one is always do your best. Because, as he puts it, under any circumstance, simply do your best and you will avoid self-judgment, self-abuse, and regret. Highly recommend this. I talk about this probably too much to my students throughout the year. So if you end up being one of my students, you're guaranteed that I'm going to talk about this. So I would highly recommend that any teen, any adult pick this up and read it. The second one, this is one I've just finished. Richard Wagamese is a Aboriginal author, Canadian, lives out in the prairies and writes for the Edmonton Journal. I've followed his career for over 20 years. I read one of his first books called Keeper in Me and was so moved by it, it sort of still stays within me. And this one, I'm really thinking about boys who love hockey. If you love hockey and you love sports, this is the book for you. This is the story of a young man who discovers a love for hockey in the early 1960s, sort of in the heyday of Hockey Night in Canada. He's introduced to it through a priest who he meets at his residential school. It's a very tragic story because it is about a young man who suffers at the hands of abusive teachers at his residential school, but it ultimately is a story of resilience and of the power of spirit, and I highly recommend this. This is one of the best pieces of writing I've read in a long time. And I can't sort of talk about Richard Wagamese without also talking about Joseph Boyden. He is also an Aboriginal writer. This is his newest novel, The Orenda. I've read everything by Boyden. I would highly recommend anything by him. The Orenda, though, is a really interesting book in that through Black Spruce and his previous novel, 3 Day Road, lead to this book. He says he had to write those 2 books in order to write this one. So this one actually takes you back in history in the 1600s when the Jesuit priests were coming over and settling the Canadian frontier. And it's the story of 2 tribes. It says it's an important and engrossing novel, and I think it's an absolutely essential piece of writing to read, to understand our history and to come to terms with voices that have never been represented in literature. And it is absolutely beautifully rendered. So, highly recommend The Orenda. Very mature content, though. There's some very violent scenes, but they are done with such compassion and such knowledge of that violence. It's not violence for violence sake. There's a real reason about why he's written it. Love him, love everything by him, pick it up. And the last book I wanted to talk to you is Anne Patchett, State of Wonder. I think everybody could read this and love this novel. I've read everything by Anne Patchett. Probably my favorite one, I thought, before I read this one, was Bel Canto, because I lived in Lima, Peru during the terrorist occupation of a Japanese embassy, and Bel Canto is loosely based on that terrorist occupation, so I was fascinated with her historical, fictional representation of that time. And she's gone back now into South America in this book, and she takes you into the Amazon, and it's really the war of pharmaceutical companies, and specifically a fertility drug. And you learn about a tribe that's almost extinct, and an obstetrician who's gone a bit nutty and is living with this tribe And they send two representatives from the pharmaceutical company to try and bring her out. So if you liked Heart of Darkness, or you're intrigued by Heart of Darkness, it's sort of, to me, a modernized take on Heart of Darkness with a twist. Love it. Thank you for letting me talk about reading today. Have a great summer, and I'll see you in the fall.